IELTS Writing Task 2, Lesson 4, Conclusions. In this lesson, I'll give you an easy method for writing conclusions. Before we start, just two quick, easy rules for conclusion writing. First rule, never write anything new in your conclusion. The conclusion should simply repeat or summarize what you've already said. Never put any new information there. I call that a surprise conclusion, when you surprise the examiner with something new at the end. So don't save your opinion for the conclusion. If you are asked to give your opinion, it should be clear throughout the whole essay what your opinion is. Nothing new in the conclusion. The second easy rule for conclusions is just one sentence. One sentence is enough. You're just going to repeat and summarize what you've already said in the rest of the essay. And I'm going to give you a few tips about how to do that now.
The conclusion technique that I'm going to give you in this lesson is easy. Just paraphrase the answer that you gave in your introduction. You've already answered the question in the introduction in a general way. You've explained that answer in the main body, and now you just repeat what you've already said. But we want to repeat it in a different way, so we paraphrase, we use different words. I'm going to show you examples of how I do that for the 4 types of IELTS Writing Task 2 question. The 4 types, remember, are discussion, opinion, problem and solution, and the 2-part question. Sometimes discussion questions also ask you to give your own opinion. We'll look at that in a moment. So for the 4 question types, I'm going to show you a short 1-sentence conclusion where I paraphrase what I've already said in my introduction. Let's start with a discussion question. This question's also going to ask for your opinion as well as for a discussion of both sides. It's a question that I've been using on my website over the last couple of weeks. Here's the question. In many cities, the use of video cameras in public places is being increased in order to reduce crime, but some people believe that these measures restrict our individual freedom. Do the benefits of increased security outweigh the drawbacks? I'll read you the introduction that I wrote for this question, and then we'll see how I paraphrased the answer in that introduction to write my conclusion. Here's the introduction. It is true that video surveillance has become commonplace in many cities in recent years. While I understand that critics may see this as an invasion of privacy, I believe that there are more benefits than drawbacks. We won't analyse that introduction too much because today is about conclusions, but you'll see in my conclusion how I have paraphrased the main answer in that introduction. Here's my conclusion. In conclusion, I would argue that the advantages of using video security systems in public places do outweigh the disadvantages. Let's analyse my conclusion to look at the technique. First thing to notice is that I always start with in conclusion. There's no reason to start in any other way. It will not improve your score if you find another phrase to begin with. So always just begin with that same thing, in conclusion. Next thing to notice is I've given my opinion because the question did ask, do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? It was asking for my view on that, so I've put I would argue. And some paraphrasing, I wrote I would argue instead of I believe from the introduction. A change in words there. That's my first example of paraphrasing. Next example, I've written in my conclusion video security systems instead of video surveillance that I wrote in the introduction. Another example of paraphrasing, advantages outweigh disadvantages, whereas in my introduction I put more benefits than drawbacks. You can see it's just one short, simple sentence for the conclusion that paraphrases what I've already said. There's no new information in there. It's just repeating, summarizing in a different way. And by giving some different words, using some paraphrasing, I'm showing the examiner a few more examples of my range of vocabulary. Of course, that's useful for your vocabulary score. You're adding a bit more variety. Now that you've seen the technique of paraphrasing, the introduction to write the conclusion, I'm going to show you 3 more examples with an opinion question, a problem solution, and a 2-part question. All of these introductions and conclusions come from lessons that I've already done on my website, so you can find the full essays on the website ieltssimon.com. We'll start with the opinion question. Here's the question. Families who send their children to private schools should not be required to pay taxes that support the state education system. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? I'm going to quickly go through everything now, so pause the video if you need time to read that. Let's move on to the introduction. Some people believe that parents of children who attend private schools should not need to contribute to state schools through taxes. Personally, I completely disagree with this view. Let's see how I used the technique of paraphrasing to answer in my conclusion. In conclusion, I do not believe that any financial concessions should be made for people who choose private education. Again, I started with in conclusion, and this question required my opinion again, so I put I do not believe instead of I completely disagree. Remember, it's acceptable to use the word I. You have to give your opinion for this, so it's the best way to do it. More paraphrasing, I put financial concessions instead of should not need to contribute through taxes. A financial concession is some kind of discount, something cheaper or a reduction. And finally, people who choose private education, I wrote that instead of parents of children who attend private schools. So parents of children who attend private schools are people who choose private education. Again, very simple paraphrasing. I'm restating my answer just in a different way using some different words. And that shows good range of vocabulary, and I'm writing nothing new, so it's quite a simple technique to use. Moving on, let's look at a problem and solution question. In the developed world, average life expectancy is increasing. What problems will this cause for individuals and society? Suggest some measures that could be taken to reduce the impact of aging populations. Let's look at my introduction. It is true that people in industrialized nations can expect to live longer than ever before. Although there will undoubtedly be some negative consequences of this trend, societies can take steps to mitigate these potential problems. And now let's compare that with my conclusion. In conclusion, various measures can be taken to tackle the problems that are certain to arise as the populations of countries grow older. If we highlight the paraphrasing, we can see in the conclusion I have various measures can be taken to tackle, whereas in my introduction I wrote societies can take steps to mitigate. Problems that are certain to arise is what I wrote in the conclusion, whereas in the introduction we had there will undoubtedly be some negative consequences. And finally, populations of countries grow older instead of people in industrialized nations can expect to live longer. So grow older instead of live longer. Again, it's just paraphrasing. I'm giving the same answer, but I'm saying it in a different way. The final example for the 4th type of question, which is the 2-part question. Here's the question. There are many different types of music in the world today. Why do we need music? Is the traditional music of a country more important than the international music that is heard everywhere nowadays? Question about music then. Let's look at my introduction. It is true that a rich variety of musical styles can be found around the world. Music is a vital part of all human cultures for a range of reasons, and I would argue that traditional music is more important than modern international music. Let's compare that with my conclusion. In conclusion, music is a necessary part of human existence, and I believe that traditional music should be given more importance than international music. Notice, as usual, I begin with "in conclusion" and then I paraphrase my answer using a necessary part of human existence instead of a vital part of all human cultures, and I believe instead of I would argue, and should be given more importance instead of is more important. Let's summarize what we've looked at, especially the technique of writing these conclusions. So for conclusion sentences, we're just going to write one sentence, and you don't need any new information in that sentence. We're just repeating or summarizing what we've already said. So the way to do that is by paraphrasing, and paraphrasing is good because it also shows variety in your vocabulary use. So although you're not saying anything new, you're expressing the same answer in a different way, and that's good for your vocabulary score. I've been through everything quite quickly in this lesson and shown you the conclusion technique for 4 different types of question in only 10 minutes. So if you need to look over anything again, please go back through the video and pause and read carefully. Also, please download and print the worksheet that's attached next to this lesson on the website. The worksheet focuses on this paraphrasing skill and shows you some of the good examples of vocabulary and paraphrasing that I used in my introductions and conclusions in this lesson. That's the end of the conclusions lesson. Next week we'll look at planning in more detail.